For almost 45 years, Stephen King's novel, The Long Walk, was this legendary thing in Hollywood. It was seen as this absolute masterpiece of psychological horror, but also completely, fundamentally unfilmable. The story, which he actually wrote under his pen name Richard Bachman, is a massive cult classic, but for decades it just stumped some of the smartest people in the entire industry.
And yeah, that's really the big question, isn't it? The book is pretty much all internal thoughts and conversations while these kids are just walking endlessly. There's no big action scenes, no crazy set pieces, not really a complicated plot. So how on earth did a film crew finally crack the code on what is basically a literary endurance test? All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so first things first, you gotta understand what makes this story so uniquely difficult. The premise is so simple, but it's also absolutely horrifying, and it's exactly why filmmakers have been both obsessed with it and, frankly, terrified of it for so long. And the rules, they're as simple as they are brutal. There are no teams, no real strategy, you just have to endure. The whole story isn't about outsmarting somebody. It's about watching these boys slowly break down, physically and mentally, as they just walk toward their own death, one step at a time. All the real action is happening inside their heads.
And man, this movie's journey to the screen, it's almost as long and grueling as the walk in the book. Horror legend George A. Romero was supposed to do it way back in the 80s. Frank Darabont, the guy who directed The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile, he held the rights for years. But it took over 3 decades for everything to finally click into place with Lionsgate and Francis Lawrence, the director behind The Hunger Games.
So what was the secret sauce this time around? What changed? Well, the team, led by Francis Lawrence, started in the smartest place you possibly could. They went straight to the man himself. They sent their script over to Stephen King for his blessing. And you know what's so funny? After all those decades of this story being out in the world, King's one big note, it wasn't about character, it wasn't about the theme, it was about pure, simple, practical realism. King, who actually wrote the first draft when he was just a teenager, realized that nobody could keep a 4-mile-per-hour pace for days. I mean, that's a power walk, almost a light jog. It's just not believable. So by slowing it down to a more realistic 3 miles an hour, the film instantly grounds you in the story. It makes the horror feel more real, and it actually helps you believe that these boys might think they have a shot at winning.
Okay, so they figured out the walking speed. But now for the real challenge. How do you make a movie that's basically 2 hours of walking and talking not feel like a boring slog? The answer wasn't going to be in the action. It had to be in the actors.
At the end of the day, this whole movie lives or dies based on the bond between these boys. It's their conversations, the friendships they form, their shared horror, that has to carry the entire film. The whole thing was going to come down to the chemistry of the young actors they hired to walk this terrible road together.
And their whole strategy really clicked into place with one key decision. They started with their main character, Ray Garrity, played by Cooper Hoffman. The casting director said that Hoffman's incredibly empathetic and open performance was the perfect anchor for the whole cast. His warmth literally allowed them to build the rest of the group around him, creating this core group of friends that you, the audience, could really truly care about.
But look, great casting alone wasn't going to solve everything. To really translate King's very internal literary story into a visual movie, the filmmakers had to make some pretty specific, let's call them surgical changes to the original book.
They started with the characters. So in the book, our hero Ray Garrity is a lot more flawed, kind of ambiguous. The film makes him more of a clear-cut hero by giving him this powerful motivation. His dad was executed by the state, and the guy who runs the walk, the major, represents that state. This gives Ray a direct bad guy to focus on. His friend McVrees is changed from being bitter and cynical to being the real emotional heart of the group. And the Major himself, who's barely seen in the book, is now a flesh-and-blood, taunting villain played by the one and only Mark Hamill. And it wasn't just the characters. They tweaked the plot, too. The number of walkers was cut from 100 all the way down to 50. Now, that's a huge deal. It means the movie can actually spend meaningful time with the main characters instead of just having them be faceless casualties. And like we said, Ray's motivation is sharpened up from being kind of marky to a very clear revenge story, which gives the audience a much stronger hook to hang on to. But all of those changes, they are nothing compared to the biggest, most controversial decision they made, and they saved it for the very end. The filmmakers didn't just tweak the ending, they completely flipped the entire message of the story on its head.
So let's put these two endings side by side, because the difference is night and day. The book ends with pure, soul-crushing despair. Ray wins, but his mind is just gone. He's broken. the victory means nothing. The movie? It makes a shocking 180-degree turn. Ray gets shot, and his friend McVreeze wins. But instead of taking the prize, he asks for a gun and executes the Major. It transforms the ending from this bleak story of survival into a powerful act of violent, defiant rebellion.
So, the big question is, did it work? With all these changes, from the walking speed to that totally different ending, did they finally pull it off? After 45 years, did they successfully adapt the unfilmable? Well, the numbers and the reviews, they tell a pretty clear story.
The film was made on a pretty lean budget, just $20 million.
And it went on to pull in over $63 million at the worldwide box office.
So, you don't have to be a math whiz to see that's a huge win. They made back their budget more than 3 times over. For a story this dark, that is seriously impressive.
And it wasn't just a box office hit. The critics loved it too. The movie landed a whopping 88% positive score on Rotten Tomatoes, and reviewers just could not stop talking about these soulful, heartbreaking performances from Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson, whose friendship was the real core of the story.
In fact, the film's producer Roy Lee thinks this movie has some serious staying power. He made a pretty bold comparison, saying that he believes, just like The Shawshank Redemption, this movie's reputation is only going to grow until it's seen as a true classic.
And that really brings us to the big debate here, doesn't it? The movie version of The Long Walk worked because they made smart, targeted changes to a classic book. But that final act, that moment of defiance, it completely changes King's original bleak message. So does that choice honor the spirit of the story by giving these kids one last moment of power, or does it betray the novel's uncomfortable truth about how hollow survival can be? It's a question that really gets to the very heart of what an adaptation is even for.